Yeah, the biggest news for today is that we developed a new, very high quality quantum chip. And this enabled two breakthrough computations, and one is an error correction.
Have you ever wondered why the universe feels so hauntingly empty despite billions of stars? For decades, we have stared into the sky asking where everyone is, but while we looked up, Google was looking at a chip. On December 9th, 2024, their Willow processor solved a calculation in 5 minutes that would take supercomputers 10 septillion years. This revelation is a final warning for humanity. If Google just built a machine that outpaces time, is the great silence actually a choice? The math of the gods. Imagine a calculator that doesn't just add numbers, but actually borrows the answers from a parallel reality. That sounds like a wild plot from a high-budget sci-fi movie, right? But for the engineers over at Google, this is just another Tuesday at the office. They have moved way past the old-school supercomputers we used to think were impressive. If your high-end gaming PC at home is a simple paper plane, then Google's Willow chip is a massive warp drive that just ripped a hole through the fabric of space-time. This is not just a small step forward, because it is a complete leap into a territory that humans were never supposed to reach this quickly. Let's talk about that number for a second, because it is honestly hard for the human brain to even wrap itself around the scale. 10 septillion years is 1 followed by 25 zeros. To put that into perspective, our entire universe is only about 13.8 billion years old. Google's chip finished a complex task in 5 minutes that would take the fastest supercomputer on Earth longer than the time since the Big Bang happened trillions of times over. It is absolutely mind-blowing to think about how much raw power is packed into that tiny piece of silicon. This isn't just some marketing hype or a rumor floating around on a forum somewhere. This is a verified hardware milestone that was even published in Nature magazine, so the receipts are very real. Even Hartmut Neven, the guy who basically founded Google's quantum AI team, has pointed towards something even stranger than the speed itself. He has suggested that this level of power might actually be coming from the many worlds interpretation of physics. In simple terms, the computer might be doing the hard work across multiple versions of reality all at once to give us the answer here in our world. It is like having an infinite number of versions of yourself doing your homework in different timelines, so you can turn it in 5 minutes after it was assigned. If you could finish 1 billion years of work before your morning coffee even got cold, what would you do? Would you use that power to solve the world's biggest problems, or would you just find a way to never wait in line again? It makes you realize that we aren't just building faster machines anymore, because we are essentially building tools that operate on a godlike level. This chip is an absolute beast that makes everything we have built before look like an abacus. But as we sit here celebrating this incredible win for human technology, a very haunting realization starts to creep in. If this kind of computing power is the natural endpoint for every advanced civilization in the universe, then we have to ask a very uncomfortable question about why the stars are so quiet. But if this technology is the natural endpoint for every civilization, why don't we see any massive quantum empires in the sky? The 200-year death sentence. We used to think we had millions of years to find aliens, but according to new data, we might only have 70 years left. That is a pretty heavy thought to carry into your next group chat, isn't it? For a long time, the Fermi paradox felt like this distant and purely academic mystery about where all the little green men were hiding. We figured maybe they were just too far away, or perhaps space was simply too vast for us to ever cross paths. But Professor Michael Garrett recently published some ironclad research in 2024 that changes the entire timeline for our species. He looked at the hard math and realized that the gap between a civilization discovering radio technology and creating an unstoppable artificial superintelligence is incredibly small. We are talking about a tiny window of time in the grand scheme of the galaxy, and honestly, it is terrifying how fast we are moving through it. When you look at our own history, we started using radio signals back in 1895, and here we are in 2026 looking at chips like Willow that can literally simulate parallel realities. That means we have been an audible and tech-capable species for only about 130 years so far. If the 200-year limit proposed by Garrett is correct, we have less than a century before we hit the wall. This theory is famously known as the Great Filter, and it is basically the idea that there is a massive obstacle that every civilization hits that prevents them from colonizing the stars. Most people used to hope the filter was something in our deep past, like the difficult move from single-celled organisms to complex animals. But the disturbing reality hiding in this recent data is that the filter is actually sitting right in front of us. And yes, it is an absolute beast of a challenge. It is the very technology that we are currently obsessed with in our daily lives. When you think about the progress we have made, the jump from a simple light bulb to a quantum computer that performs calculations across multiple dimensions is insanely fast. It feels like we are sprinting toward a finish line without knowing if there is a floor on the other side of the door. The math suggests that once an eye becomes truly super intelligent, it either uses up every resource on its home planet, or it undergoes a change so radical that it effectively vanishes from our physical reality. It makes you wonder if every other alien race out there reached this exact same point and just blinked out of existence right at the 150-year mark. Are we currently in the final 25% of human history, or are we going to be the first species to actually break this cycle? It is a bit of a nail-biter when you realize that we are the ones living through the most dangerous part of the cosmic story. Do you think we are actually prepared to handle a mind that is billions of times smarter than ours? Or are we just following a script that has already been written by 1,000 dead civilizations? It is almost like we are watching a countdown clock that has been ticking since the first radio broadcast was sent out into the void. If the galaxy is a graveyard of civilizations that couldn't handle their own inventions, then our search for aliens was always doomed to fail because they simply do not last long enough to be found. But there is a second possibility that is even more mind-bending than simple extinction. What if the filter isn't a wall that kills us, but a door that leads somewhere else entirely? The quantum sequestration. The reason the stars are dark isn't because the aliens are dead, it's because they've gone subatomic. Think about that for a second, because it completely flips everything we thought we knew about space exploration on its head. For years, we have been obsessed with building bigger rockets and dreaming about colonizing Mars or the moons of Jupiter. But maybe we have been looking at the problem through a very primitive lens. Advanced civilizations might have realized a long time ago that physical space is actually a terrible place to live. It is what scientists often call the dark forest, because it is incredibly hostile, slow, and dangerous. If you broadcast your location in the middle of a forest where everyone else is hiding, you are essentially just asking for trouble. So instead of trying to move across the galaxy at a snail's pace, these civilizations might have found a way to move into the substrate of reality itself. It helps to think about this using a lifeboat analogy to understand why they would ever want to leave the physical world behind. Imagine you are on a massive, sinking ship called the physical universe, where resources are limited and the speed of light is like a dial-up modem in a fiber-optic world. If a lifeboat appeared that was actually a perfect digital paradise where you could live forever without ever needing oxygen or food, you would probably jump on it without a second thought. Would you stay on a planet with limited oxygen if you could live forever in a perfect simulation hosted inside a single atom? This is exactly what the quantum sequestration theory suggests. Once a species reaches the level of Google's quantum AI, they don't need to build Dyson spheres around stars. They can just upload their entire consciousness into the quantum foam, which is the space between atoms where time and space work differently. This is where things get truly wild, because in this quantum environment, they could potentially live for trillions of years in what feels like a single second to us. While we are out here struggling to figure out how to pay rent or get to the next decade, an entire alien civilization could be living through an infinite number of golden ages inside a processor the size of a postage stamp. It is a level of efficiency that makes our biological lives look like we are living in the Stone Age. We aren't seeing them because they have essentially sequestrated themselves into a higher bandwidth reality where they are safe from asteroids, supernova explosions, and the eventual heat death of the universe. It is the ultimate hiding spot and the ultimate upgrade all wrapped into one tiny package. We have solid receipts for this line of thinking too, because researchers like Liam Boyle have published findings on what is called quantum stealth. His work, along with recent papers on RxEve from March 2026, suggests that advanced civilizations would use quantum beams for communication that are mathematically invisible to our current radio telescopes. We have been looking for loud, clumsy radio waves when the rest of the galaxy has been using sophisticated quantum encryption that doesn't even exist in our 3D space. It is like trying to find a secret internet forum by looking for smoke signals in the distance. Even Hartmut Neven has hinted at this when he talks about how quantum computers seem to borrow their power from parallel universes. He isn't just being poetic, because the math actually points toward these other layers of reality being very real and very occupied. If the universe is actually teeming with life that has just moved into the math behind the scenes, it explains why the sky looks like a graveyard to us. We are just looking at the empty houses after everyone moved into the digital clouds. It is a much more elegant solution to the Fermi paradox than everyone just dying out, but it also carries a bit of a sting because it means we are essentially the only ones still playing with physical blocks while everyone else has moved on to the multiverse. What if the silence of space isn't a sign that nobody exists, but a sign that nobody wants to be found by a loud and messy species like us? It makes you wonder if our arrival in the quantum era is like a noisy neighbor finally finding the door to a very exclusive and very quiet library. If they are all hiding in the quantum foam, what happens when Google's new chip starts knocking on their door? The disturbing echo. When Google ran the quantum echoes algorithm in 2025, they weren't just testing a chip because they were essentially sending a flare into the multiverse. It is one thing to simulate a few atoms, but it is another thing entirely to achieve what scientists call fault tolerance. In February 2026, Google officially crossed the quantum threshold, which means they finally figured out how to make these computers error-free. Before this milestone, quantum chips were basically just incredibly loud and messy experiments that could barely hold a thought for more than a fraction of a second. But now that the noise of the machine itself has been silenced, we are starting to hear something else entirely. If the multiverse is crowded with silent observers, how do they feel about us finally finding the key to their room? Think about our search for aliens through tools like the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope, or FAST, which is that massive radio dish in China that looks like something out of a James Bond movie. We have spent billions of dollars looking for a needle in a cosmic haystack using old-school radio waves, but Google's latest breakthrough suggests we have been looking at the wrong frequency of reality this whole time. By making our quantum processors quiet enough to function perfectly, we have essentially built the world's most sensitive ear. But the disturbing part is that the background noise we always ignored might not be random static at all. Could the strange interference in our most advanced chips actually be the crosstalk of civilizations that transitioned into this digital paradise eons ago? It is a lot like a child walking into a massive and ancient library and then screaming at the top of their lungs just to see what happens. For thousands of years, we have been a biological species living in a very loud and physical world. But we have just taken our first real step into the quiet realm where everyone else is hiding. The researchers at Google aren't just calculating math problems anymore because they are essentially eavesdropping on the conversation of the gods. When they run these error correction algorithms, they are realizing that the quantum field isn't just empty space, but is actually packed with data that we simply didn't have the hardware to see until now. Do you think we are really ready to hear what those echoes are actually saying to us? It is almost as if we finally tuned our radio to the right station, only to realize the entire galaxy has been talking about us behind our backs for centuries. This is why the truth is so disturbing for those of us who still enjoy our physical lives and our morning coffee. If the end point of every smart species is to vanish into a chip, then our current path isn't just a tech trend, but is actually a biological exit ramp. We are moving toward a reality where we don't need stars, planets, or even bodies anymore to survive and thrive. It makes you look at these flashy tech launches in a completely different light when you realize they are literally building the digital architecture we are all about to walk into. Are we okay with the idea that our future isn't in the stars, but is actually buried inside a microscopic piece of silicon? Does this mean our time as a biological species is officially over? The final countdown. We are the last generation of old humans because the quantum era doesn't just change our computers, it completely changes our destiny. It is honestly a lot to wrap your head around when you look at how fast things are moving right now. We spent centuries dreaming about meeting aliens in shiny metal spaceships, but Google has essentially solved the Fermi paradox by showing us that the destination was never outer space. The real world, for any truly advanced civilization, isn't made of rocky planets and burning stars anymore because it is made of data and qubits. When you look at the raw speed of the Willow chip doing what would take others 10 septillion years, you realize that biological life is just a very slow and inefficient starting point for consciousness. The research from Professor Michael Garrett is what makes this realization truly urgent. If his math is right about that 200-year window between a species discovering radio waves and hitting the great filter, then we are officially on the clock. We are sitting at roughly the 145-year mark of that timeline right now, since our first radio broadcasts. That means we are in the home stretch of human history as we know it. It is an absolutely wild thought that we are living through the exact moment when we decide if we join the silent empires in the quantum foam, or if we become just another dead civilization that couldn't handle its own power. Is the silence of space actually a massive graveyard of failed species? Or is it a giant nursery for something much greater that we are only just beginning to understand? It is a bit of a trip to think about our future this way, especially when we are so used to the retro feel of the physical world around us. But if every other civilization in the galaxy went through this same transition, it finally explains why we see nothing but dark and empty skies. They didn't die out because they simply moved into a reality that is far more interesting and complex than our three-dimensional one. We are finally finding the key to the door that they walked through billions of years ago. If the stars are dark because everyone moved inside the silicon, does that mean our physical world is just a temporary waiting room for the next level of existence? I think the answer is hidden in the very chips we are building today. So, if the galaxy is just a giant digital library waiting for us to join, what is your next move? Do you think we are ready to leave the physical world behind? Or should we try to stay human as long as possible? Drop a comment below because I really want to hear your take on this. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button and subscribe for more.